Jerusalem, Jesus instructs his followers about the power of faith and the duties of discipleship. He calls his disciples to adopt the attitude of servants, whose actions are responses to their identity rather than works seeking reward. A reading from Luke chapter 17. The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink? Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Sisters and brothers in faith, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Increase our faith, the disciples asked Jesus. And it's kind of good for me to hear that they felt the same, inadequacy about their faith that I feel about mine sometimes. I don't know if you feel that, but I feel it sometimes. Do I have enough? How much faith do I need? And that's the trouble with faith, isn't it? It's just so hard to quantify. At least with the commandments, you can kind of keep track if you've ever killed anybody or committed adultery. That's sort of easy to count, right? But faith, it's either too easy or too hard. Over 80% of Americans say they believe in God, but only about a quarter of those who say they believe in God ever go to church. Is that really faith? Or on the other hand, faith is just too hard. How can I ever know if I have enough? What if I doubt, even just a little? Is that too much? So the disciples asked what we ask: Jesus, increase our faith. And Jesus says, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, "Be uprooted and planted in the sea," and it would obey you. Thank you very much, Jesus, right? That helps so much. In other words, it sounds like he's saying faith is just plain impossible. At least for me, I haven't moved any mulberry trees lately. Have you? And yet, the disciples have been doing just that. Remember in Luke chapter 10 that Jesus sent them out 2 by 2 to preach the good news, to heal the sick and cast out demons. And they were so excited when they came back. They actually did what Jesus sent them out to do. They cast out demons, they healed the sick, and people even listened to their preaching. I mean, who would have guessed? It worked. How much more evidence of faith do they need than that? And they had done it without even knowing it. It was as if Jesus had said, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, and you do, you could say, this should happen, and it would. And it did. Remember? We worry about faith. Do I have enough? As if faith is something that we can muster up in our hearts and God rewards us for it, or something like that. And then Jesus tells that story that, at least for me, pops even that balloon. The parable of the servants. I mean, how do you like that parable he told? Even if a slave works his head off and he's still just doing his duty, he certainly doesn't deserve any special reward. He's still just a slave. Thanks a lot. Yeah. We don't have personal slaves anymore, most of us, but we have similar experiences. When you go to the grocery store and the cashier takes every item and scans it perfectly after standing on her feet all day, and then she bags your groceries and maybe even carries them out to your car, you don't consider that anything special or out of the ordinary, do you? She's just doing her job. You might say thanks, but you're certainly not going to give her any medals for it, right? So it is with faith. Even if our faith is increased and we do uproot mulberry trees and plant them in the sea, we're just doing our job. Nothing special. Certainly nothing to impress God so much that he's going to send you to heaven or something. So what do we do? When I first hear Jesus' parable of the slaves, it makes it sound like faith is a life of hard, thankless work followed by no reward. I mean, why would anybody sign up for that duty? Would you? The good news is, we don't have to have faith in order to get to heaven. Rather, we have faith because Jesus has already given heaven to us. Our Lord's gift creates that faith in our hearts. And so this parable of the slaves is not telling us how to get to heaven. It's describing a response to a gift already given. The cashier doesn't serve you to get a job. She serves because she's already been given the job. And so also we serve in response to Jesus, not to earn his favor. And then you might still ask, why? Well, who would do that? If I've already got it, why work, right? And to say that means we've missed the gift in the first place. It would be like a parent saying, well, I already got the baby I wanted, why do all the work to take care of it? Would a parent say that? I love watching new parents. Do you watch them? You do. You've got grandkids and stuff, many of you. The parents are fun to watch. My son just had a child a year ago, and I got to watch him change. And they finally got pregnant with this child that they had been praying for, and suddenly these two people that were doing all sorts of interesting things on the weekends, they were buying cribs and diapers and pajamas and strollers instead. And instead of partying on Saturday nights, they were painting the bedroom and setting up furniture, not to mention enduring morning sickness and lower back pain and labor. Could anybody pay you enough to do things like that? But they did it all for free. And they were glad to do it. Why? And then the child was born, and their life was consumed with diapers and getting up 4 times a night and crying and burping and spinning up and car seats. And one of them had to quit their job to stay home with a little guy, and on and on. And eventually, 5 years from now, there'll be a bus that comes to their house, a big yellow school bus. And they'll put this child on the bus and thinking, now I'm finally going to be free, and they're both going to cry. Why? How much would you pay a person to do all that work? And instead, they pay for the privilege to do it. Willingly. Gladly. And after a hard night of teething, they don't expect any reward because the gift has already been given to them. And they're only doing what any parent would do, right? That's how it is with Jesus. We worry, increase our faith so we can earn maybe Jesus' favor or something. And the truth is, he's already yours. Given to you in baptism like a husband is given to a wife. He's already yours, nurturing you at the Lord's table just like your parents nurtured you at their table. He's already given you every good gift that he has, and the rest of your life is a life lived in response to that gift already given. Serving him gladly, willingly, nothing special. What else would you ever want to do? Bob had been married to Ione almost 50 years by the time that I met him. I can't remember how long they were married, but he could. Bob could remember. On any given day, this is the truth, his son would test him in front of me so that I would know that this is the truth. On any given day, he could remember how long they had been married. He could not only tell you how many years, he would tell how many months, weeks, and days Ione had been his bride. That made me feel so guilty. And he would remind her the 10th of each month that it was their anniversary every month. His bride, he called her, even after 50 years. They used to be famous all over the country for their dancing skills, not the country, the county, for their dancing skills. And they danced tirelessly and gracefully every Friday and Saturday night. And even after long hours of farming and trucking, Bob never missed an opportunity to dance with his bride. Until the day she began to lose her graceful steps. They thought it might be the flu or an inner ear infection. Turned out to be MS, and their dancing days were over. And she encouraged him to dance with other women. She knew how he loved to dance, and there were lots of single women who needed a dance partner. But from that day on, Bob politely refused. He would only dance with his bride. And as much as he loved to dance, he never danced again. At least not on the dance floor. With MS, a new kind of dance began, a dance of caring for his bride. Each day he'd get up early, he'd do his chores, and then he'd come in and help her get dressed and cleaned up for the day. Then he'd make her breakfast and clean that up, and then he'd go to work. He'd come back at dinner and at supper and kiss his bride, prepare a meal, clean up. In the evening, he and his bride would go play cards at the neighbors. He'd get her dressed up, help her walk to the car. He'd teach their friends, how to take whatever time was necessary for her to arrange her cards with her numb fingers. And they'd talk, and they'd laugh, and they'd have a wonderful time. And then late at night, he'd bring her home, help her get undressed, and ready for bed. Over 25 years, he did that. Willingly, gladly, for his bride. And wild horses could not have kept him from doing this dance with her. And Bob was pretty sure any husband would do the same. You know, nothing special. And then one day Bob got sick. And the roles were reversed. Ione sat by his bed, held his hand. When the neighbors came over to pay their last respects, Ione would get them playing cards with Bob, and they'd talk and they'd laugh and they'd have a wonderful time like they always did. So that they went home, the neighbors went home and wondered, well, who was comforting who here? In his last weeks, Bob worried about the half dozen times in 50 years that he had snapped at his bride. And literally with tears in his eyes, he asked her forgiveness, as if those moments of irritation would cancel out 50 years of faithfulness. And she couldn't even remember them, but she forgave him anyway. And then she tried to thank him for all the years that he'd cared for her, all the happy times they'd spent together. And Bob said, "Today's the 22nd, isn't it? 54 years, 10 months, and 12 days ago, you became my bride. And you gave me the privilege of being your husband. Every day, every moment, even the hard ones, have been such a gift to me. I only did what any man would do for a bride like you." Jesus said, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Followers of Jesus, they don't see it, but they move mulberry trees every day. And as far as they know, they're just doing